introduction is not, woo, got it. It just told me really loudly that this meeting is being recorded. Anyway, so I have a new book with Terrapin Books called Flatback Sally Country. And I am so thankful. Diane is here, Lockwood, and I'm so thankful to her for picking this book up. I wrote this book as part of an NEA grant that I received in 2019, I believe. So that was when I started writing these poems, and kind of kept writing them. They are about, the poems that I'll be reading today are from that book, and they're about there's a character named Flatback Sally, and she's kind of a ne'er-do-well girl about town, who always gets into trouble. And it's about the town, really, too, where people live and really try to have joy. And so I am looking forward to reading these poems for you, and I think that's who I am. So it's nice to see you all. Thank you for coming and to meet you. Do you want me to read first then, Joan, or do you want? Yes, okay, I'll start out then. Let's see. The first poem is called History. There is only one story, a woman says, and maybe she is saying something about the truth, or maybe not. The history of a place like this is the history of those who leave it. It's a great place to be from, they might say, and smile. Pretty men and pretty women and their easy belief that they are moving forward through the world, their necks graceful in their city clothes. There is only one story, and it is not this story. Sweat and grease and the grace of ritualized days, the pinch of repetition in the joints. The world would be forgiven for believing the best of this land is the dust that a hand knocks from old boots. Maybe there is something of the truth to what she says, like there is only one way to live in a place one cannot leave, and that's to love it. Take the raw animal of its days by the throat and throttle the one story from its jaws, or maybe not. There is only one way to live in a place where everybody believes nobody lives, like there is only one way to be a fire, and that is to burn. And that's history. Let's see, thank you. I'm gonna read. This is a poem called Property, and a lot of the poems that I write in this book, I don't know if you guys like to hear a little bit about them before each, but a lot of the poems that I write in this book have to do with the violence that women experience, casual violence, or the violence that living does to women and to men as well, but really specifically to women. This poem is called Property, and that's a major theme in it, as you'll see. She had a man. They lived alone behind the turned back of the world. They lived alone around the edge of things, rooted their muffled way through long days. He called her baby and sometimes come here and sometimes you stupid bitch. His smile a canyon filled with small bones. The cold world was her old man in the cold shade of his old gray whispering, darlin', dance with the one that brung ya. Move in the shoes that first rawed your heels. Nothing fills silence like a dead father's voice or a single rifle crack. She had a man. She lived alone, danced alone in the long shade of his fear. They dug their way through life. Baby, he told her, and he bared his teeth at the air next to her eyes. If I ever catch you with another man. He smiled like her father when she caught him slipping his hand up another woman's Sunday dress. The theater of his teeth, she had a man. Baby, he said, and her need for him was a constant atonement of hands. His body the earth, her life a tunneling. Thank you all. some of the poems that I write are not politically correct, I should say. They don't use the proper language, or they talk about women in ways that are cold or mean. This next poem that I'm going to read is called "The Whole Town Knows Sally is a Slut." And the reason I use that language is not because I believe that that language is good to use or is the way that people should talk about women, but because it's the way that people do talk about women, and or about men, or about people. And so I guess I go in for reality in that sense. I don't want that to read as an endorsement. So this one is called "The Whole Town Knows Sally is a Slut." That Mardi Gras of men trampling her glads, that front porch boot stomped muddy. Buddy, let me tell you, she's a wildcat. Don't ask me how I know. Anyway, everybody male and able-bodied and old enough to drink knows that. Don't look at me like you never watched her walk away, that sway in them hips, that quick look back, her licking them lips. The whole town knows what Sally wants. Hot factory of a woman wants a lunch break man, a potatoes and steak man. I know. She's a church girl now. On Sunday morning. What's that mean? Flatback Sally, her nickname's always been, ever since before she was 16. She was that poor young teacher's dream. Her practically grown and more than ready, and him run out of town for that one thing. Anyway, Sally, think I might give her a ring. That's obviously a little humor. I wanted to introduce Sally, who is a main character in this book. Though all the poems are about her and about what she goes through and how she lives life. This one is called Woman. And this is something I do in this book often, is to reduce people, to take a person and reduce them to a stereotype and then try to write my way out of that stereotype. And that's in a way because I want people to understand that in a way we are all of our stereotypes and more. You know what I mean? I think. And so that's something that I did, was try to bring it down to woman or farmer, or, you know, and then try to write my way out of that. How do I make someone more than that? And so this poem is called Woman. The way a charming man can ride his violence to any height, I decide to speak the truth, is worth all the long years I kept my silence, like a right I wasn't sure I even wanted, like a right my body tried to stop performing. The way a man can ride a lie, so flaunted, to truth inside another woman's need, I couldn't be the truth inside his lie. Truth became in me a kind of greed, leaving me gasping after it like air. Your mouth, pressed to mine, only sought instead of giving. I breathed in fear your lie would choke the flower of truth I knew, and every garden I planted would grow for you. I hope I'm not reading too quickly. I feel like I'm a fast reader and I read. No, I'm good. Okay. I have another poem called Crank. Another big theme in my work is work. And especially in this book, it's about the thing that work is here where I live. Is it's not just what you do, it's who you are. And it's so important. A lot of times the first thing that people will be told about you is whether you're a hard worker or not, or an introduction will be, this is a person who, you know, do you know this person? They're a hard worker. Or they do this, you know. And of course that's kind of a thing everywhere. But here it's almost raised to a moral imperative that you be a hard worker. And in some ways that's been difficult for me. As Joan noted, I have severe agoraphobia, so I don't leave the house very often. Or I try to leave every day, but I have difficulty with it and I'm unable to work. So yeah, Dick, rural Ohio is not different in that way from Indiana, I'm sure. I'm trying to keep an eye on everybody's statements. So this poem is about work, but it's also about something that people use to help them work here, which is meth. People will use meth to help them work, and then once the factory has broken their body, they will use opiates to help them live. And that has been the demise of a lot of people that I grew up and went to school with. It is an absolute atrocity going on here right now. How many people are addicted or dying of addiction. And so this is called Crank. For a woman who can't afford teeth, it's a well to wish in, a different hell to twist in, a cell to kiss in, less a pail to piss in than this promise. You'll never really care where you piss again. Machine of a human being who says, if I am a machine, let them have my body. I will go to live among the clouds. What is a drug but a cold coin dropped down the well of a throat? What is a wish but a castle fashioned from smoke? What is a tweaker? The unwinding machine of a woman's jaw, pumping the rusted pistons of her teeth. What is crank? Hot glass, a brief sheen. For a woman who can't afford church, it's a burnt clean. Crank is the grease for the newest American dream. For a woman who can't afford sleep, it's the newest scheme. Cover the hurt of your work with the hurt of your shame. Trade your bones for a good buck. Turn the crank all day, each moment the same. Get fired for stealing a pop off the lunch truck. And that actually is a real story that I knew. My friend was dating a man who was the nicest man in the world when he was not on meth, and then he went back onto meth, and he was making probably $1,500 a week at the trailer factory, busting himself, and he got fired for stealing a Gatorade off of the lunch truck because of the meth, because of how it messed. And nicest man in the world when he wasn't on it. So it really does change somebody. How am I doing, Joan? One more? Okay, let's do one more. I want to do, let's see here. Consider the trigger. A lot of people hunt here. And so I was thinking about the word trigger, and as we all must have over the last few years, and over about how people use guns and what we use them for, and how the language that is used about that from other places. Consider the trigger. The difference between winter and winter without, that deep freezer humming like a beast. What hunger sleeps in your belly, girl? What fear? This end of year is colder than the last, this fast approaching fast, these short days long. We can't afford to eat if killing's wrong. Consider this a warning shot, or not. Our children are not trees to take their life from light, and anyway, there's almost none. This meat, our son, this lifeblood you disdain, this loss of life our living's gain. Meat for bones and straining backs, double shifts and chopped wood stacks. Meat for making all we do, meat for shipping it to you. I want to say thank you to everybody for listening, and I hope that you liked the work. So thank you. I'm so excited to hear everybody else's.
Love the work. Thank you, Rachel. I have 5 or 6 for you from some from my new book, which is this one. Richard and Marva are going to get tired of seeing it. Oh, how do you do that with the blur?
I'll go ahead and mute myself. What do you have?
Okay. It's called Feathers to Stone. I got to try to figure out. There we go. There it is.
Put it over your face.
Can you see it? Whatever. Anyway, this is one of the reasons I want to get rid of the blur. But anyway, it's called Feathers on Stone. And I'm going to read you the first poem from it. that deals with the feather to stone. There's actually two images of feathers and stones. One is the title, and the other is this poem, Feather to Stone. You see me as a feather, as I ride the breeze down to you, gently swaying. You say you don't even feel me when I land on your heart, softly. Your hardness deflects my tiny self. When breeze calls again, I float away, weeping for you. You cannot move. Your stone self is stuck in equally hard earth, incapable of understanding that my very softness, my lightness, is my strength. You are forgiven. That's kind of one of my favorite poems in this book. And I debated on reading this one because it's not autumn, it's spring. Hello. But I like this poem a lot, and so I'm going to read it to you. It's called Harvest at the Farm Market, because farmers markets are opening up now. So we are getting some of their harvest, even though it's early. White pine baskets at the farmer's market hold autumn's panoply of apples, from Arkansas Black to Gala to Pink Lady. On the oak table next to them, displayed for my perusal, lie squashes, yellow and green, night dart eggplants, sun orange pumpkins, a few ears of corn, a line of late tomatoes, and the last jars of honey gathered from this farm's bees. I plan apple pies, eggplant timbale, ratatouille with this growing season's last hurrah. Looking beyond the table, in a far corner of the field, I spot a pile of stunted, rotting fruit, tangled vines, dried corn stalks. These, my farmer friend explains, will become a bonfire, destination of all failed crops. I plan a return to consign my own failures to these flames. I want to watch my troubles reduced to ash, caught by autumn's breath, whisked far away from me, farther than I can see. In a few days, these tables will be clear. Surrounding trees, now festooned in scarlet and golden finery, will reach up, their branches naked but unashamed, reach up to pull goodness down from clear, cold skies, surrender dry twigs to us to warm our houses, while we wait until outdoors once more breathes with fertile, softened ground, and we can plant with hope seeds set aside from this harvest gathering, preparing for a new season. Gratitude is all I have to offer in return. That poem came about from a visit to my in-laws in upstate New York, where we go, or used to go, for apples every autumn. And there were tables like that set out, and there was a big pile. And I asked my brother-in-law, not the farmer, about what the pile was for. And he's the one who told me about the bonfire. And then I've always known about saving seeds. There are quite a few people who save seeds from one season to the next and use those seeds again in their gardens. And it's especially good if you have a heritage plant, one that's rare. So anyway, that's my take on fresh food, which I like very much. So true to my heritage on that. I've often been told that I lead a very, plain life, which I do. I'm not a very necessarily a venturesome seeming person, but my daughter is amazed by the fact that I traveled all over Europe by myself when I was 19, have done other things like that by myself, but I never really considered that adventuresome because it was just something I wanted to do. I started going downtown by myself when I was 12, and downtown Pittsburgh. I was raised in Pittsburgh, and I was so excited. I love to go with girlfriends too, but I loved going places by myself. So this poem talks a little bit about the escalators and myself and taking risks. And the name of this department store was Kaufman's. Anybody here who knows Pittsburgh There's Margaret, she knows Pittsburgh. I mean, it was the center of everything. And my mother, in fact, used to say she wanted her ashes scattered under Kaufman's clock, which, by the way, even though they've now, I understand, turned the building into a Target with condominiums on top, where I used to shop for various things, they kept the clock because people in Pittsburgh would not have it any other way. They can rename Heinz Field to some other weird thing, but they can't get rid of Kaufman's clock. Anyway, here's my poem about the escalator. I loved taking the escalator in Kaufman's department store. Wide gaps and grooved steps meant Mom always called out warnings to hold on and not let anything on my person, shoelaces, long dress hems, dangle where there's moving steps fold into one another, lest I be drawn in and die a horrible death. Escalators were just one risky part of an entire world waiting to swallow me up at the smallest misstep. At age 12, I was allowed to go downtown alone to Kaufman's. I loved to take the escalator to watch the merchandise counters disappear from that odd triangular perspective as I held tightly to the handrail, exulting in the frisson of fear present in all risky undertakings. Once, just for fun, I rode up all 13 floors, from first floor perfumes to last floor furniture, gawking at ladies' and men's apparel, toys, books, housewares, and more in between. But when I felt tired or unsure of my shoelaces, or my hands were full of packages and I could not grab the rail, I took the elevator. Even now, as I try living that same balance, for what is daily life worth without some risk? So I'm going to read now a new poem. It's not in the book. This is about my dad. I did promise you one about my dad, and there's several in the book about my dad. But this one was just published by McQueen's Quinterly. You're in there, Robbie. Many, I don't know if several other of you are in there. And this was issue 18. And it's an ekphrastic poem, which those who know me know I love ekphrastic poetry, which is writing after a picture usually, but also after music or someone else's poetry or a sculpture, or even a photograph. So this one was inspired by Landscape with Yellow Birds by Paul Klee, and Christine Norcross had posted the picture of it as a prompt. And I wrote this poem and sent it off to Claire McQueen, and she published it. This is called My Canary, and the painting is Landscape with Yellow Birds. I guess he's called Clay, not Klee, but I always mispronounce it. Good thing I wasn't that military wife, right, Robbie? Okay. Even with the lights off in the dining room, a cover on his cage, hiding moon shining in our yard's dark green leaves and bushes, a small forest like Clay's, within his view, but that he never reached. Alone in the dark, perhaps lonely, for the forest he knew was beyond his cage, Mr. Tweedy only sang when my father finally arrived home near midnight. Even before Daddy's hand reached the room's light switch, that bird began to sing, and I would get out of bed to watch and listen as my dad cleaned the cage and fed Mr. Tweedy, who continued to serenade while Dad ate his own supper. I wonder if Clay also had a canary, and if that's why he drew a flock of them spread out in a darkened forest, each bird with a hopeful look on its tiny face, like Mr. Tweedy, each ready to reward someone they love with joyous song, perhaps each other, or the artist who gave them life on canvas. Or maybe the song is for us, we who admire the painting, to remind us that even in the dark, even a small bird recognizes love. This one is a little hard to read, and it was a little hard to write. And Blue Heron Review just published it in May, actually, and I asked permission to read it because it was so new, and she said fine. So here it is. My Seat at the Table. This was for a call for poems about places of sanctuary. So it's called My Seat at the Table. Come to Rome, my friend said when our son died. She offered us her Rome apartment. You love Rome. It's a safe place for you to heal. We did not go. Rome was and is a place of joy for our family, but it's not my sanctuary. When the chaos of loss becomes too much, I retreat to my place at the table, where we four, son, daughter, husband, and I, ate and laughed and talked, did crafts. The spot where I sat and worked before I had an office, that small space is my sanctuary. Seated there, I often feel our son walk behind me, give my shoulder a small squeeze, and in a soft voice, not quite a whisper, say, love you, Mom. In that moment, the pain of loss is replaced by the joy of hearing his voice, even only in my head and heart. It's where I am released to function without forgetting, to enjoy peace surpassing understanding. That chair at the table is my place of sanctuary. So to lighten the mood a little, before we turn to, and also inspired by Margaret and her book about immigrants, I'm going to read one that I dedicated to my ancestors, who I, of course, have not met because, hey, I'm old, but I'm not that old. My father's family is from a place in Italy called the Abruzzo region. It's a little southeast of Rome. Its shore, which almost every place in Italy has a shoreline, is on the Adriatic. And my father's from way up in the mountains, though. And in that area, it's one of the possible places that the Sabine people lived. And if you all remember, if you haven't known much about history, there's in Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, they talk about the Sabine women being taken away by the Romans. It's a nice little song. Oh, the Sabine women, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so I picture my ancestors as being Sabines, even though I also have ancestors from other parts of Italy, but this one is about them. Okay. Likely my great-great and more grandmother was peacefully watching her grazing sheep with her sisters, cousins, and friends when a quiet mountain afternoon became hell as Roman legionnaires leapt out from behind rocks, slung women over their shoulders, carried them down the steep hills into rough camps, those sons of Romulus, tying them to posts until all could go to Rome. Moaning and crying, her sisters, friends, cousins called out for their fathers, brothers, uncles to come and rescue them. Not my grandmother. She challenged her sisters to leave with her. We can secure our own escape. When at last the fire's embers burned, small, and legionnaires sprawled on the ground in stupor from drinks and brawls, Grandma wriggled out of the fetters on her slender wrists and disappeared into the forest, up onto the mountain. Her bare feet knew the rocky pathways. Her sheep bleated, ran with her. She climbed until at last she came to a small Sabine village and eventually married a man of her choice. Those others who stayed made sons for Rome. Eons later, Grandma's son descended the mountain, crossed the sea, married a Calabrian woman, fathered me. And that's the story. So now it's time to hear all of you, which is very exciting. And I did actually make a list. Okay. And Ken, you're going to read first. Right now, I'm going to ask for each of you to read one poem, please. And then we'll go on, but I'll ask you to unmute at the time. And let's see. I haven't put my book details in, and I don't think you did either, Rachel, right? We'll do that. We'll do that in a minute before you all start. I don't want to be, I got so excited by everybody's readings that Rachel's reading that I forgot I was going to do it because I was just listening so closely to her. But Ken, you'll be first. Dick, you'll be second. And then third will be Robbie. So, and then I'll, after Robbie reads, I'll give you the next three. Okay? Here we go. I'm muting. And Ken, you can go ahead. Mute.
Hey, I've been getting a lot of mileage out of one poem in the last 2 weeks because it won something. So I'm going to read it. It's called Knitting. Sorry, Rich. Sorry, Mava. You got to hear this again. Knitting. Over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under, under, over, under. The world is blown asunder by an under, over blunder. Then, if it's noticed, it's unravel, 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 pick up the offending stitch, which would have rendered the comforter uncomfortable. Then, back to over, under, the rhythmic wonder of knitting needles, God, and Grandma, who know how to forgive and forget. That's knitting.
I'll take my cue from your nod. Thank you for the reading and the opportunity. I'm putting my ordering information for this book, A Sword in Both Hands, Poems Responding to Russia's War on Ukraine, in the chat, and also a link to the organization which I'm donating my poets' proceeds to, which is Trust Chain Ukraine. But because I'm a bad promoter and always like to read my latest poems, I'm going to read my latest poem, yet untested in front of a public audience. And many of you know that I have a practice of writing poems responding to the news each week. But until this poem, I've never started off with taking a position. Sometimes the poem takes a position, but I knew what my position was before I wrote this poem. Robbie's heard it. That's an unusual way and normally toxic to the writing of a poem, but I gave it a shot anyway. And this poem has an epigraph from Elon Musk, who tweeted, "Soros reminds me of Magneto. He wants to erode the very fabric of civilization. Soros hates humanity." And the poem is entitled Musk. It is the sweet smell somewhere between piss and peach. It is the pheromones that make dogs sniff butts and armpits reek. It drives some frantic, some to retch, some to raise torches. The scent is familiar, redolent of my people's fear when Apostle Paul curled his finger at us Jews. It is the stench of a man-child, obsessed, a speaker in the tongues of comic book mutants. This is clockwork orange shit. This is droogs barking their secret argot. This is Martin Luther of Wittenberg calling the dogs to spill the spleens from rabbis. This is all the tropes that my people pull the strings, that the world dangles from our cartoonish noses, that we make our bread from the blood of believers, children, that the plague got the plague from us. It's like this: Musk, tweet in code, say the name of one of us, say it again, say he hates humanity, say he rules the world, chant again, Soros, Soros, Soros. To your kinder, it means Jew, Jew, Jew. You say it's not true, that he's just evil, like the Jews. Every time it's a surprise, like a hurricane before the time of radar, like an eclipse before astronomers, like a tidal wave. Every storm has a calm, every crusade has a live goat that must be slain, every pogrom has a libel. And yes, you are the king and his jester. To your gang of boys, you tell the truth. To us, you smell so familiar. Like an oil fire, like a garbage dump, like burned skin. Thank you all.
Do you want me to go ahead? Okay, I was waiting to be called on. This poem is called Dangerous, and it was recently published in Journal of Random Wonder. I think that's what it's called. Dangerous. Sometimes at night, the silence of the house hovers at the very edge of audibility. I pull the covers tight around my chin and shiver, settle in. That silence I've mistaken for a threat that I can bar with locks and keys and constant vigilance is just my native hum, the one I brought into the world, a hollow, lonely whine, wind sweeping through a clear-cut field that used to be a forest, disembodied wings. It's been there all along, beneath the floorboards of my own imagination, nourished by a tangle of dark roots.
That was really wonderful, Robbie.
Thank you.
Okay, we have three other readers. Margaret, actually two other readers, unless someone else wants to read. We have Ken and then Marva. And no, Margaret, I'm sorry. We have Margaret and then Marva. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
As I was saying before we started, this is my new book, which they said will be out by June 15th, or maybe sooner. So I'm just on the final edits now. And people said that they wanted to see, or they wanted to hear the poem about the cover, which is called Morning Portrait. And it was a custom in Hungary to take these photos when somebody died. And actually the photo was this big. It was a horizontal, but my third son, bless his heart, is a fine art photographer, and he did this cover for me. So, and it's called Morning Portrait. Looking like Bergman's characters, they grieve for the body in the coffin. In the 40s, it was a tradition among Hungarian villagers to take a mourning portrait with relatives and close friends gathered behind the open casket. I have one of Papa's mother, my grandmother Katalin, and relatives I never met. Trapped in Transylvania, given to Romania after World War I. Letters, not kisses or warm hugs, were how we exchanged longings for one another. Mine in English, hers in Hungarian, my parents as translators of our words of love. When grandmother was 76, a sepia-toned mourning portrait arrived. A black babushka covered her hair amidst the mountain of white lace draped over her and the coffin. My father's sister Erzsi, dressed all in black, and brother János, who most resembled Papa, sat in the front row, the only two left at home. Janusz wore a suit that looked vaguely familiar and was the only male wearing a regular tie. I remembered the boxes of used clothing, hiding rows of printed paper currency that Mama sewed into thick linings because they easily passed inspections at the stringent checkpoints in Romania. Unacquainted with most of Papa's clan, I scoured all the dejected faces for any resemblance to me. I found none in the expressions drooping with grief. Papa said I look like his mother. Many, many years later, Papa died suddenly of a massive heart attack. I wrote to tell relatives in Transylvania, the ones who still might be alive, and now spoke only Romanian. They hired an interpreter to write to me and ask why I sent no mourning portrait. I wrote back, finding it hard to explain that we take no such photos in America, preferring to remember the dead as they lived. I never heard from my relatives again, making me feel as if I had robbed them of their due. 70 years later, I stare at the aging photo of my grandmother and grieving kith and kin and lament the loss of my Hungarian family. Thank you.
Marva?
Do you see my wren? Okay. This will take me back to Joan's dad's birds, maybe. Okay. It's called Moments of Joy. The wren, tiny, beautiful, and brown, sits just outside the bathroom window this morning. It burst into a loud, lively tune, singing from its heart, sitting on a bare branch of a sweet gum tree. Again and again it sings, again and again I listen. I wish to see this presenter. In my quietest moment, if I open the curtains, I know it will fly into the nearby forest. I know it will return another morning, another day. Thank you. Okay.
I don't have anyone else listed. Would anyone else like to read? Richard, go ahead.
I'm not going to read a long poem because I know we're almost out of time, but this is a poem I wrote years ago when I was traveling to Florida from time to time on business. This is called Evidence of Life. A hot night in Sarasota, storm clouds building, dark, but all talk and no rain. Air as damp and sweaty as a bathroom mirror after a hot shower. I find a white splotch, small and frog-shaped, then realize it is a frog, or what's left of one, flattened and bleached, steamrolled into the asphalt by countless cars rolling through the hotel parking lot. I wonder if this thin skin, this postage stamp of a frog would qualify as a fossil, or does it have to be replaced cell by cell with rock? Let's say they repave this lot, then dig it up millions of years hence, long after layers of sediment have hardened under pressure and the whole peninsula has sunk into the sea to be thrust up in some nascent chain of peaks. A paleontologist from a planet where there is still intelligent life will claim Mr. Froggy here as evidence something primitive occupied this rock. I sit on a park bench. There is no breeze, only the whisper of a promise made by the slow creep of clouds clogging the sky like logs in in a bend of the river? Will they finally give up the rain that triggers the sinking of this ground, stirs up the rising chain of mountains? Will they find me here next to Mr. Froggy? And if they do, will they know which was the dominant species?
Kathy, you don't want to read? You could read with your picture up, and I think we lost somebody here.
No,
I guess he had to go. Ron
I
left.
didn't realize there would be an open mic, so I don't have anything to read. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I'm a bad hostess. I didn't really explain well enough probably in my emails, but just learning to do this hosting thing for a thing like this where we're doing an open reading. I've hosted many a meeting, but not a reading per se. So, well, we are finishing up right around 3. We held it over in case there were more who wanted to read, but I really want to thank you all for coming. Rachel?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you both so much. It's been wonderful.
It was lovely to hear everybody read too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
A great experience, Joan.
It was a pleasure to hear your poems. They were all just so very, very good. And Dick, I'm sorry you had to write that one you wrote, but it's always necessary and good to hear that someone is aware and to make others aware. So, sorry.
Well, I don't think of poems normally as rhetoric, so it was sort of a unique exercise, and I was sort of channeling inner Maxine Kuhlman.
It transcended it though, Dick. It transcended just rhetoric. It wasn't just propaganda. It was something more greater. So it definitely did something more. It was powerful.
I think it went to the heart of what is really the evil that is in people's hearts and that they don't want to admit. And so it was very good. I read your poems all the time, whether they're on the rattle thing or not. Whatever you put on Facebook, I read. So I'm a fangirl of yours as well as of Rachel and Margaret and Robbie. And Ken, you know I'm a fan of yours, and Richard, I'm a fan of yours, and Marva. So that covers just about everybody except Diane, which I'm a fan of your press, but I haven't heard that much of your own work. Would you like to read something of your own before we leave?
No, I came unprepared. I was just prepared to listen, not to read.
Okay.
That's all right.
And so I really want to thank everybody for coming, and I will now end the recording. Oh dear, how to do that.
Everybody have a good day.
Thank you.
Same to you.
I put a link for the reading I'm hosting on Tuesday in the chat.
Thank you, Robbie.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
And you have to register.
Okay.
And I just want to tell everyone that if you do buy